This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. This Week in Virology, episode number 282, recorded on April 25th, 2014. Hi, everybody. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to TWiV, the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today from North Central Florida, Rich Condit.
Howdy, Vincent. How are you?
I'm well. How have you been, Rich?
Just dandy. Everything's just dandy.
Everything is dandy.
Yep, and we have 82 degrees Fahrenheit, partly cloudy skies. It's a beautiful time of year. It's great.
Starting to heat up down there.
Yes, it is starting to heat up. It's going to be really, I think it's going to hit the 90s early next week. So,
wow.
That's okay. It's good.
So you're wearing shorts already?
I would be, but there are events going on this week, like our graduate student graduation convocation and medical student recruiting and stuff. So I'm dressed to the teeth here. I got my khakis on. I even wore a tie today.
Ooh, a tie.
Yeah, a tie.
Wow, that's very impressive. I don't think I've ever
wore my
seen
smallpox tie.
Nice. Have I seen that?
I don't know. It's got smallpox virus. Aya wearables. I think that's been a pick of the week at one point. It's got a smallpox virus and bifurcated needle on it. It's cool.
I like that. Also joining us today from Western Massachusetts, Alan Dove.
Good to be here.
Do you have 16C as I do?
I have 17C. It's 63 Fahrenheit. It's an absolutely lovely, lovely day. Clear blue skies, light wind.
Quite
gorgeous.
Nice. Yeah. Well, we have some clouds here.
Yeah, just a few high clouds are starting to roll in, and it's supposed to rain tonight. But today, lovely.
Also joining us today from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Kathy Spindler.
Hi, everybody.
What do I call that? North Central Michigan?
No, Southeast.
What? Southeast. Mm-hmm. I have the New Yorker's view of the world.
Yeah.
I have to write this down. Here, I'm going to write it on the show notes. Southeast Michigan.
It's North Central Florida.
Right.
Yeah.
Southeast Michigan. How are you? You okay?
Yeah, I'm swell, but the weather is 46 Fahrenheit, 8 Celsius, and
chilly, huh?
Rainy.
I'm sorry.
That's that rain that's on the way here, I guess.
Yep.
Is it really?
Wait.
When are we getting it, Alan?
According to the forecast, it's supposed to roll in tonight.
Huh.
Yeah.
So Alan,
and I suppose a week ago it was somewhere out in California, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Things move. Yeah, things move. So let me announce that on May 18th in Boston, Massachusetts at the Boston Convention Center, Alan and I will be doing a TWiV, the occasion, and Kathy Spindler is chairing a session at the same time.
Right, and giving a talk, so I won't
you can't
be there.
join us.
So I might not get to meet Alan in person?
Oh, you should.
Might.
That's not happened?
No, not yet.
Huh.
When your session is over, when at 4?
I think 4:30, something like that.
Well,
yeah.
Alan may be gone.
Well, maybe we'll meet before.
We're doing our session at 2. Yeah. I may have to take off, but I'll try and stick around.
I mean, we'll be done by 4, but
maybe we can meet up beforehand somehow.
Or we can go into Kathy's session, sit in the back, crack open some beers, and
yeah,
sure. So we will do TWiV at 2 p.m. Not sure of the room yet, but we'll post it. Our guests will be
Dun, dun, dun.
some virologists.
Hang on.
yes.
Julie Pfeiffer,
Cool.
who works on polio pathogenesis, really interesting stuff. Who we've talked of her work here on TWiV, and Paul Dupre.
Oh, excellent.
We get to talk about his work, which we didn't. We talked about BSL-4 stuff last time he was on TWiV.
Yep.
And I'm sure we'll talk about the needle.
I'm sure.
Find out what's going on with the Boston City Council.
Yeah.
So that should be fun. That'll be a good episode. Thanks to ASM.
The Boston City Council?
Boston.
And
you know that this will be live streamed, so you can listen and tweet your questions and all that. And, of course, recorded as usual for later distribution. I like saying that. We have no follow-up today because I guess everyone's on vacation, so we can go right into our stories.
I have follow-up.
Okay, go for it.
The Peter Salk episode was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, really enjoyed that.
I think we were very lucky. I have a contact, Caitlin Hawk, who she was in a course I taught years ago, but she writes about vaccines and that sort of thing. She hooked us up. And
Great.
So I appreciate that, and I enjoyed it very much. It was cool. Can you imagine? He got the polio vaccine in his kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. He's an interesting guy.
And today is World Malaria Day.
Uh-huh.
It is also DNA Day.
Really?
You're kidding.
Apparently, it's the anniversary of the publication.
Right.
Oh.
1953.
I thought every
53.
day was DNA Day.
Well, yes, it's inherited from the previous day. But
Wow, cool. Well, I know that October 24th, is World Polio Day.
Uh-huh.
October 24th, right. And there is going to be here in New York City a big to-do with Salk because it's his 100th birth anniversary, as you heard on the Salk podcast. So they're going to have a bunch of things going on, which I will hope to go to attend, but I have to go to San Diego that day. So I'm trying to work around that. It's unfortunate that it's happening on the same day
yeah,
to have such problems, right?
yes.
Okay, World Malaria Day. Anything else before we continue? Nope. All right, so the two papers we have were, well, one of them was sent in by my colleagues here, you guys. But the first one is a paper published jointly by the British Medical Journal and the Cochrane, what is it called? The Cochrane what?
Cochrane Collaboration.
Collaboration. It's called Oseltamivir for Influenza in Adults and Children, Systematic Review of Clinical Study Reports and Summary of Regulatory Comments. Now, this is a story we have actually touched upon before, if I'm not mistaken. Oseltamivir, or Tamiflu, is an inhibitor, a drug that's available. It's licensed to treat influenza. It's a neuraminidase inhibitor. It inhibits the enzyme of the influenza virus that is required for release of the particle from the surface of the infected cell. Binds into the neuraminidase pocket where the ligand of the enzyme would normally be, which is sialic acid. It was shown many years ago by my PI, Peter Palese, that if you inhibit the neuraminidase, the virus gets stuck on the surface of the cell. So these drugs were actually designed by computer to fit into the pocket, and we have two of them licensed. One is Tamiflu, the other is Relenza. And
By two different companies,
two
right?
different companies.
Yep.
So Tamiflu is developed by Roche. Now, a while ago,
Relenzo is GlaxoSmithKline.
GlaxoSmithKline.
Yep.
So you're supposed to take these within 24 to 48 hours, and they're supposed to reduce the duration of symptoms, etc. There has been a bit of controversy associated with these for some time, and part of it is because Roche has not, or previously had not, released all the clinical trial data. And I think they released two results of two different trials, and on that basis, WHO recommended it be used and stockpiled, and governments all over the world have been buying billions of dollars worth of this drug. And so whenever money is involved, of course, questions are asked. And didn't we talk about this on a TWiV, the fact that the data weren't being reported and there were questions about its efficacy and so forth?
I certainly remember a long conversation about the issue of drug companies releasing all of their clinical data and the pros and cons of that issue. Mm-hmm. So that must have been part and parcel of that discussion. I don't know what TWiV was.
I tried to search for it yesterday. I couldn't find the episode, but it's out there in the cyber world. But apparently, in the meanwhile, the Cochrane people have got all the results from Roche. And there are a lot of them.
I want to comment on the Cochrane collaboration. I think this was a TWiV pick many, many moons ago. There's a Wikipedia site, and they have their own site. The Wikipedia describes them as an independent, nonprofit, non-governmental organization consisting of a group of more than 31,000 volunteers in more than 120 countries, formed to organize medical research information in a systematic way to facilitate the choices that health professionals, patients, policymakers, and others face in health interventions according to principles of evidence-based medicine. So these guys are really good at sort of, they specialize in, I would say, meta-analysis of large sets of data to try and evaluate it and make it available publicly.
Yep.
So they took these data, which were available to them, and these are on randomized controlled trials. So you have a treatment and a placebo arm, which were aimed to test the effects of oseltamivir for either treating influenza, prophylaxis, which is to give it before disease, and post-exposure.
And just one additional little discussion about them getting these data. This has been a multi-year campaign by the British Medical Journal, the BMJ, which is where this paper now appears, to get to generally get companies to release more of their trial results, or at least reports of all of the trials that they conduct, and to specifically get data on Tamiflu. So this is not just Roche suddenly decided of their own accord to turn this over. There's been continuing pressure and mounting pressure, and the BMJ has been kind of leading the charge on this to get these data opened up. And I think one of the things we talked about with the data release issue is obviously it has to be stripped of identifiable information, and that's a little tricky. But I gather in this case what they're getting are simply the full reports, the type of thing that the FDA or the European Medicines Agency would have analyzed in approving the drug.
Right.
So it's like a much longer version of a journal article, and I think they say that the median length of these papers was like 900 pages or something.
Huge.
Yeah, in the end, I think the summary was something like 150,000 pages of information.
Right.
Yeah, so they're not getting any identifiable information about individual patients, but they're getting as complete a view as you can of these trials while still maintaining confidentiality.
Right. The clinical study reports are considered the most exhaustive summaries of randomized controlled trials of drugs.
Right.
So this was not something Roche wanted to do. They were forced to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's clear here, there's some points in this article where they say we tried to ask Roche for additional information and they ignored us.
Yeah.
It took 3 years.
Yeah, it took 3 years just to get what they did get, which is most of it. But some of it didn't make sense, and they asked questions which they don't have answers to.
So they identified by a variety of criteria 83 trials of Tamiflu in those different situations that I mentioned before, and they threw out 60 of them, which were either not appropriate, or they were unblinded, or screwed up in some way, in incomplete reports. It's really, as we go, you will see. I'm amazed at how many errors and omissions there are. You would think that if something so costly and so important, you'd make sure everything was right on.
Well, I'm sure they try.
Yeah, I guess so many people are involved, it's really hard.
So many people are involved, and a lot of them, most of them, in fact, don't work for Roche. They're doctors at these clinical trial sites, and somebody screws something up, and then that botches the whole trial, and now you've got to repeat the whole process.
So of these 83, not all of them were conducted by Roche.
Right.
But Roche only submitted 2 to the FDA, and as we will see, they had some issues in those.
Right.
So, for example, 48% of the studies were okay, but only 48% showed adequate reporting of random sequence generation. In other words, I guess assigning a drug or placebo in a random fashion. 48%.
Yeah.
65% showed adequate allocation concealment. So I think some of them said that the caps on the placebo and the drug were different colors.
Right.
So the
So the doctors knew whether they were giving somebody placebo or drug, which means it's not really blinded.
Crazy. Okay. And then the other thing that I find, so some of the trials were, all but 3 of the treatment trials were under-recruited. And then the placebo capsules actually contained a compound, dihydrocholic acid and dibasic calcium phosphate, which they say are known to cause gastrointestinal symptoms.
Right.
Why wouldn't they just give them, I don't know, something...
Sugar,
yeah.
The famous sugar pill.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay, treatment trials of adults. Tamiflu reduced the time to first alleviation of symptom by 16.7 hours.
Right.
Not a lot,
So
right?
another summary that I read said this represents a reduction in the duration of symptoms from 7.0 to 6.3 days.
Yeah.
It's not a lot.
Nope.
In children, 29 hours, I think. It was a little more, but not much more. No effect on children with asthma. So that's important because that's a population where you want to see an effect. Okay, so that was treatment. In treatment of adults, no difference in rates of admission to hospital between treatment or non-treatment groups. So again, one of the things you would like is if this helps prevent hospital admissions for serious flu.
Yeah, that's actually a real serious problem.
Yeah, in children,
That's a lot of the rationale for stockpiling these drugs is that in a pandemic, you could reduce load on the hospitals by giving people Tamiflu and
of course that's why these are stockpiled for a pandemic, right?
Right.
Children, no effect on admissions to hospital. No significant treatment effect in adults for sinusitis, bronchitis, otitis media, ear infections, or any complications classified as serious or that led to study withdrawal. Similar results in children. In treatment of adults, Tamiflu reduced unverified pneumonia. That's great.
Yes, this was interesting. This was a really interesting aspect of this. So the clinical trials have various endpoints and measures that they're looking at, and it turns out that pneumonia doesn't necessarily mean pneumonia.
Yeah.
Right.
So some of these trials and some of the stuff that they were looking at, they were getting a clinical diagnosis of pneumonia, and in other cases, they were just asking the patient, have you had symptoms of quote-unquote pneumonia?
Yeah, they did not do any laboratory confirmation of pneumonia.
So you've got patients who had quote-unquote pneumonia, and
no difference for 5 trials that recorded pneumonia. No difference in children on pneumonia. So that's really no effect on quote-unquote pneumonia.
Yeah, alleged pneumonia.
So those are treatment groups. Prophylaxis, no significant effect on asymptomatic influenza, which is defined as detecting infection by increases in antibody titers, which you would find only a few weeks after the infection. Did not reduce influenza-like illness. And then they talk a little bit about the 2 trials that were submitted by Roche, and they say Roche concluded that the trial proved that Tamiflu could interrupt transmission, but they say that the design of this trial is so weak that you can't make any conclusions. They apparently, so nasal voidance is one of the signs that they used, except they gave these people so much paracetamol that you can't really determine if there's an effect on nasal voidance because of the effect of that drug.
Right.
It's crazy. And then side effects. So some marginal effect, beneficial effect in these flu symptom type reports.
Right.
Yeah, it
and
looked to me as if the really only statistically significant effect that they could report was these modest reductions in the length of time that one had symptoms. And everything else was either not significant or not enough data to be significant.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, and they suggest that the symptom relief may be from a sort of a general anti-inflammatory
Right.
activity.
This is really amazing to me. I mean, this drug we know in cell culture inhibits infection, right? Virus influenza infection, but they're suggesting that has nothing to do with the effects in people. I wonder, I mean, I suppose the drug is getting to the respiratory mucosa, and in fact they don't actually address it here, but they must have done studies before this was licensed that showed
there must be preclinical studies
right?
that show it. Well, mice do lie.
They do, yeah.
Monkeys exaggerate, and cells in culture have no idea what's going on.
So it's possible that the drug is not even getting to the right place, right?
It is possible.
I suppose. I would imagine there would be preclinical data on that, because usually there'll be a bunch of pharmacokinetic analysis and everything else. So
that's part of the information that's submitted, of course, but they didn't review it in these.
On the other hand, I don't really know what I'm talking about here, but I would assume that those would be animal studies, and
yeah, sure.
And you're not going to look at necessarily tissue distribution in humans, right?
No.
And humans may be different than that.
And this paper is looking just at the clinical trials.
Right.
Sure.
That's right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, since they have the data, they could, mine it for other things as well, because we may end up concluding that this drug is not useful. So harms, they looked at the side effects. Adults. Let's see. This is a little bit weird. I didn't. The proportion being diagnosed as influenza affected. Oh, they sort of repeat the symptoms here in the beginning of this harm section. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Right?
I listened to the press conference.
Yeah.
And I like the way one of the speakers put it. So if you were thinking about a million recipients of Tamiflu, 200,000 of them might show signs of nausea or vomiting.
Yeah.
150,000 of them headache. 10,000 some kind of psychiatric adverse effect, including nervousness, aggression, suicide ideation, paranoia. 6,000 renal and complications, and 4,000 hypoglycemia.
Yep. So nausea, 1.57 increased risk. So there you go, 150,000. Vomiting, diarrhea. Actually, decreased diarrhea. Hey, it's a good sign.
Yeah. But they weren't clear. It wasn't clear whether that was really decreased diarrhea or it was maybe because the placebo was causing diarrhea.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's decreased diarrhea relative to placebo, but as we just discussed, the placebo had some gastrointestinal effects. So
vomiting in children, headaches, nausea, psychiatric adverse events, headaches, renal events. So in numbers that, as you said, Kathy, when you put this in millions of people, you get a lot of adverse effects.
Right. And the speaker went on to say you'd need 80% of people to take it for 8 weeks for it to be prophylactic, and it would have to work in asymptomatic cases, which it doesn't.
Yeah, doesn't at all. That's right. So interestingly, in their discussion, they say the evidence we have presented shows that Tamiflu has symptom-relieving effects. They're very nice there at the beginning. And they talk about the possible anti-inflammatory properties that you mentioned, Alan, which may be why you feel a little bit better. But it's minimal.
And the downside of the anti-inflammatory effect, they suggest the possibility that it may inhibit antibody response.
Yeah, which is why you can't really measure asymptomatic infection so well, right?
Right.
No evidence that it interferes with person-to-person spread. That was another thing that WHO was citing as a big reason to stockpile it. And they say no evidence that it has anything to do with inhibition of spread, which is really bad.
Now, interestingly, the FDA all along, although it was approved, said that the benefits were only modest, and has kind of stuck to that very conservative conclusion. And they were really the only agency that had access or did thoroughly review all of the clinical study reports. But somehow beyond the FDA, other agencies, including the CDC and the World Health Organization, adopted it more enthusiastically.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that these this toxicity profile just became evident by looking at all of the trials, not just the 2 that were submitted?
I don't know. It seems to me that this is not something that was really adequately addressed in the previous reviews. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because
But by the way, there's a nice graphic accompanying the BMJ sort of cover story on this, showing who knew what and when. So it highlights which trials were available to what agencies, and the FDA and the EMA, of course, had access to everything. The WHO, which was really kind of leading the charge to stockpile Tamiflu, only had 2 trials to base that on, and then they show how the Cochrane collaboration has gotten access to more and more of this over the years and analyzed more and more of it.
Yep. Well, their conclusion is, we believe these findings provide reason to question the stockpiling of oseltamivir, its inclusion on the WHO list of essential drugs, and its use in clinical practice as an anti-influenza drug. That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah.
So if I had flu, I don't think I would take Tamiflu personally. What do you guys think?
It doesn't sound like it's worth it.
No.
Right.
Not worth it, especially in view of the side effects, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Of course,
I'm surprised we haven't seen more news on this.
I think it got some coverage when it came out.
Yeah, it was a couple of weeks ago already.
Yeah, it was a few weeks ago, and it got covered as, Tamiflu may not work.
A couple of my students asked me about it a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, they were saying, "Hey, I heard Tamiflu's no good," because we had talked about it in the lecture. So, I kind of think that's sad that I don't know why this happened, right? I mean,
and we can't say that it doesn't work. All we can say is that we don't have the data showing that it really works.
Well, it has marginal benefit.
Yeah, it has.
Right?
It has some marginal benefit,
but it's got a lot of side effects.
Appears to have some symptomatic relief, and it may actually be pretty good. But the weaknesses of the studies are such that we can't. I mean, that's essentially what the Cochrane collaboration is showing here, is that from the data, what you can really conclude is not a very strong argument in favor of buying billions of dollars worth of it.
You think it's warranted to do additional properly controlled trials?
I don't know. I mean, this is how many trials? 84 clinical trials.
Yeah.
And this is as good as we've gotten.
I personally would spend the money on making new drugs, better ones, but there's no guarantee. As you see, if it works great in culture, no guarantee.
I'd love to see an analysis like this on Relenza.
Yeah, apparently there isn't. Well, I guess that may be forthcoming. There's right. They comment on that.
Yeah.
Well, let me see. This other article I read. I thought it included some Relenza.
No, this is just Tamiflu.
There's in the same issue. There's this. There's a bunch of editorials from the British Medical Journal. There's one editorial that has links to a bunch of other stuff that's in the BMJ, and all of those are nice summaries and comment on this whole process. And one of the articles is a comment on the value of randomized trials, saying that they aren't the be-all and end-all, and observational studies are another way to approach this sort of thing. So I think some of this needs to be rethought. Interesting.
So Rich, how does an observational study work?
Well, I had to look this up on Wikipedia. Basically, let me see. Did I lose that? I would have to look it up again, because it's a situation where you're, without actually constructing a trial, you're taking data that is available through medical records,
right,
or other data sources and then sorting it through some sort of statistical analysis to see if you can figure out whether or not certain treatments are working. And there's all different types of observational studies. There's longitudinal studies, there's case studies, and beyond that, I'm not an expert on this. Now, I don't know how you would construct an observational study in this, unless you have a number of doctors that are dispensing Tamiflu and can somehow collect data on the people that are taking it and try and make a study out of that.
Yeah.
I found the information that I had about Relenza, and so there was an article from the NHS of UK. So that's their National Health Service. I think that's what NHS stands for. And they're talking about this article, and they say the researchers obtained 107 study reports, and they eventually used data from 20 on oseltamivir and 26 on zanamivir, which is Relenza. And then this article reports some Relenza results as well, reducing time until the first alleviation of symptoms, for example. So that's where I got that they actually did research on Relenza as well, Relenza studies.
Because in the method, it says select types of studies. We included trials on oseltamivir.
Yeah, so
I don't know.
I don't know.
So they have the data. Maybe it's
Yeah. I think this is their Tamiflu paper,
Mhm.
and I think we should expect to see the Relenza paper coming out at some point after that, because obviously the volume of information that they're processing here is pretty immense.
Yeah,
but somehow this National Health Service article already had some of this information about the Relenza results.
Right.
So, yeah. Okay.
The editorials note what just an enormous task this is, and I can imagine these guys really did a lot of work.
They have a section called "Strengths and Weaknesses of this review," and they say,
and they criticize themselves. It's very interesting.
They criticize themselves for not having a lot of experience reviewing these types of,
huge
things,
amounts of data.
because this stuff has not been made generally available.
and there are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 authors on this paper.
I see guys up late at night under, it's the midnight oil thing, boy. Here's my wiki entry on observational study. In epidemiology and statistics, an observational study draws inferences about the possible effect of a treatment on subjects where the assignment of subjects into a treated group versus a control group is outside the control of the investigator.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And they can be broken down into a case-controlled study, a cross-sectional study, a longitudinal study, a cohort or panel study, and an ecological study. And all that information is available and interesting on Wikipedia. One of the things is that one of the places where it's useful, observational study, is where a randomized experiment would violate ethical standards.
Right.
Okay? So, for example, you can collect data on pregnant women, right, where you wouldn't be able to include them in a drug trial or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Well, this paper is open access. There's also a page at BMJ called Tamiflu Campaign, which has the press conference that Kathy talked about and links to other information, who had what when, as Alan said. So if you're interested.
To me, one of the most interesting things about this is the release of the data. And I wonder what sort of impact that will have on reporting and evaluating clinical trials for drug approval down the road. Because it strikes me that this is precedent setting.
Yes.
And I would hope that it would have a positive effect on the transparency of these sorts of trials and the way they're conducted. One of the points they make through this is that, the company funded I don't know who's going to fund them otherwise, but the company funded all the trials and some of the analysis and this kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what impact this has down the road.
And this is, this is a blockbuster drug for Roche.
Yeah.
And has made them a heck of a lot of money. They produce something like 500 million treatment courses of this per year, or some ridiculous output, and they've made billions and billions from these this stockpiling. So this has been a huge deal.
Do you think
for
their
them.
sales are going to decrease?
As they may. On the other hand, the patent runs out in 2 years. Mm-hmm. So they're probably already at the point of figuring out, what do we do next after the patent runs out on this thing? And for all we know, that may have been part of the rationale for finally releasing these data.
Do you think that they had these crappy data and they hid them so that they could sell the drug?
I don't know whether that was. I don't know whether that was the way that happened. I mean, yeah, this is we're talking about massive ethics-changing quantities of money here, but I'm sure that what companies do when they're looking to get something approved and get it bought is they look through their clinical trials and they say, what are the best ones we have? Mm-hmm. And they're gonna cherry pick the two best clinical trials that they've got that are not only the strongest, but that provide the most positive results for their drug. And they're going to say, okay, WHO, look at these studies. You definitely want to buy this stuff. And whether they're consciously burying the other studies or whether they're rationalizing it by saying, well, that study never got fully enrolled and the pill caps were the wrong colors and we don't know what the data mean.
Yeah. Do you think governments can sue Roche to get their money back?
Probably not.
No, there's no cause for.
Yeah, I mean, somebody may try, but.
One of the bits of research that I did following this up was to go look up the Roche stock.
Yeah.
And it appears to have survived this. Of course, now that it's on TWiV, who knows what will happen.
What's the opposite of a TWiV bump?
TWiV dive?
A TWiV dip.
TWiV knock.
Right.
But at the same time, having said that this has brought in a lot of money, this is Roche we're talking about.
They make other things.
Yeah, they make other things. And so, yeah, this has brought in billions, but they've got other drugs that bring in billions. And if people buy a fewer doses of a drug that was going to go off patent in a couple more years, it's not going to kill them.
I think it's sad, though.
It is.
It further erodes confidence of the public in pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, that is potentially one of the most damaging things.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are we ready to move on?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think so.
All right. Second paper, I think Rich sent to all of us last week.
Right. A colleague of mine, Art Edison, sent it to me.
It's called Rescuing U.S. Biomedical Research from Its Systemic Flaws. It's published in PNAS. And the authors are Bruce Alberts from University of California, San Francisco, Mark Kirshner from Harvard Medical School, Shirley Tillman, Princeton University, former president, and Harold Varmus, head of the National Cancer Institute.
I think I've heard of some of these people.
Yes, they're all sluggers.
Yes.
Sluggers. Right, sluggers. Big people and very powerful and very important roles in science and science policy. And basically this, as the title says, goes through what they think is wrong with science, scientific research, and what should be done. And this is a topic we have tackled on TWiV before, haven't we?
You could say it's an arc.
It's an arc.
It's an arc, yes.
So Arturo Casadeval and Ferric Fang wrote 2 articles about this, right, which we went over. John Udell, I talked with about this as well. I don't think either of those 2 are mentioned in the references, are they? I don't think they cite the Casadeval papers. No, they do not. I think it's sad. But anyway, they start by saying that research in the U.S. is wonderful. It's led to a huge economic growth and better life for everyone, vibrant pharmaceutical and biotechnology sector. But we shouldn't assume that it should constantly expand. To which I said, after reading the first paragraph, why not? If it's so great, why shouldn't it expand? So we'll get to that later. All right, they go through a lot to say that how great science has been. We've learned all these things, but it's flawed because right now there's not enough money, and it's getting too competitive, and people are competing too much for grants. People are spending too much time writing grants and not enough time thinking and being creative. And universities are being selfish and trying to use NIH dollars to build buildings and pay for their faculty. And we're training way more scientists than the market can absorb. Right?
Yep. Right.
Oh, I think
the word is unsustainable.
Unsustainable. Yes. I like this. Oh, here. So a couple of things that I really liked. So scientists spend too much time writing grants. That's absolutely true. Mm-hmm. The inflated value now accorded to studies that claim a close link to medical practice. Translational research. Mm-hmm. I'm really glad to see powerful people kind of saying, hey, we're overvaluing translational research because, whenever we've all, Kathy, Rich, and I have all been on the study section, and they want to know the medical relevance of the work. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing I underlined was overvaluing translational research is detracting from an equivalent appreciation of fundamental research of broad applicability.
Yep. It's great. And they talk about publication, how, we want to publish in the most prestigious journals, and it's become too hyper-competitive. It's full of mistakes, can't be replicated, which, of course, was the Castor-Deval and Fang complaint also. And this is an interesting thing. Long appendices that have most of the results have become the norm and accepted practice. I think we've complained about that here.
Yeah. See supplementary data.
Gosh. Yeah. Crippling demands on a scientist's time. Time for reflection is a disappearing luxury for the scientific community.
Yeah.
The section that caught my attention that I've thought about a lot is perverse incentives in research funding. Mm-hmm. The notion that medical schools, medical centers in particular, are addicted to NIH indirect costs and soft money salaries for faculty. And, just that is really unsustainable.
Yeah, it's become a little bit like a miniature version of defense contractors.
Absolutely. Absolutely screwed up. Peer review, they also complain about that increasingly professional editors are serving roles played in the past by scientists, and this can undermine the enterprise. Also, grant review, they talk about how senior scientists are not serving as much.
Damaging effects of hypercompetition.
Yep.
Shift to short-term thinking.
Yep.
Okay. Science is, I often talk about science being reactive rather than proactive. You're just reacting to whatever's going on because there's too much pressure to get this and other stuff done rather than taking the time and sit back and think proactively. We've been doing this History of Virology Journal Club, and we've had several papers from the MRC labs in the 60s, where my sense is that, this is Francis Crick and Sidney Brenner, where people took time to sit and really think about what they were doing.
Yeah.
And think about original questions and do the research. Now it's just, pressure to get something out so that you can maintain your funding.
Two statistics. Average age at which PhD recipients get their first tenure-track job, 37, approaching 42 when they get their first NIH grant.
Wow.
And these things are all pretty much traceable to too many competitors for too few resources.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so the fundamental directions you could go with this are either bring in more money or shrink the biomedical research enterprise, and not having the power to bring in the quantities of money it would take to fix this. These authors are suggesting the latter.
So sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, most of these things we've heard or said before, and they do have some recommendations for change.
Yeah.
So.
Before we get to that, though, I want to just point out that I didn't know this. Every labor economist from the 90s on who has studied the pipeline for the biomedical workforce has proclaimed it to be broken.
Yes.
Which is interesting. They also say that, I think we passed it up, that the funding levels of science is now basically 25% below what it was a number of years ago due to inflation.
Inflation-adjusted NIH funding has been plummeting.
Yeah.
Perverse incentives. Yeah, I think the universities are really at fault for a lot of this, and I think these guys let off the universities to a certain extent. We're told here just write more grants to get us more money, and I just think that is not the way to go.
Yeah, the universities really, in my experience, my personal experience at least, seem to just ignore this. Okay.
Yep.
There's a train coming, and they just turn their backs and say, hire more faculty, get more money, write more grants.
Well, because they're addicted to that cash flow.
Sure.
And, Columbia University can't afford to not get these grants, and University of Florida can't, and so forth. You can't keep the university running at this point without this quantity of money flowing in. And so the administrators don't know what else to do except to say, keep competing for grants.
But there have to be other ways to raise money. At the same time, you have to cut back, clearly, but you can't do it overnight, obviously, because...
No.
But you have to find other ways to raise money. And, there are now a number of independent institutes that have arisen. I'm thinking about the Scripps in Florida, the Broad Institute, and a number of others where they've raised money and they're sustainable. They get donors to be committed and so forth. I think it takes a lot of work, but it can be done. There are more creative ways than universities are using. I just see here at this medical center, that's all they tell us. You each have to have 2 R01s to be able to pay for what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But the paradox is a great university is made by its research faculty, right? So why can't they figure out a way to support that great research faculty? It doesn't make any sense to me. Other countries, as you guys know, are investing a lot of money in building research programs. And I'd be curious to see if they get to a point where their development is considered finished. Are they going to cut back, or are they going to be in the same boat as we are? Anyway, let's talk about some of these specific recommendations. The first one is to have Congress make a 5-year projected fiscal plan for the NIH budget. A farm bill, right?
Yes. Great idea. Great idea.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's going to work, right?
This Congress, no, they can't agree on keeping the government funded for the next 6 months.
Right, that's not going to happen. Next one is to reduce the workforce, or reduce the number of entrants into PhD programs. And I've said here for years, our department alone takes 5 PhD students a year. I think this is crazy. It's not fair to take students in when they're not going to get jobs, and that's been going on for years, of course. But
and of course, for the listeners out there who don't appreciate this, part of the pressure to do that is that the graduate students provide a lot of the labor to run the research enterprise. Yep. Okay, so cutting back graduate students means, in the current paradigm, a lot more than just not having that many more students. It means not having the people to actually do the research, so it impacts on the research program.
Yeah.
Right. As soon as you start shrinking the bottom of the labor pool like that, you have to figure out, you've got to deal with the problem that the faculty are still being pressured to bring in the grants, and to do that, you've got to bring in the results. And how are you going to do that without graduate students in your lab?
They recognize that in this
Yes.
article, and they have theoretically ways to address that.
So one thing they suggest is that the government should support graduate students with training grants rather than making us put them on our research grants. And you know how hard training grants are to get, right? You guys all know that. Mm-hmm. This is crazy. Why do they think this is going to change?
Well, in order for that to be viable, then in fact there has to be more money made available for training grants. The whole training grant process has to change.
Well, but I think this is also bound up with their desire for PhD birth control.
Yes.
Sure. Make
So
it smaller,
if graduate students are required to be supported on training grants, and you have few training grants, you will necessarily have fewer graduate students.
Right.
Well, they make the point that if you have these training grants, then there is at least some additional level of review of who's going to compete and get on the training grants.
Right.
Whereas, there's one level of competition to get into graduate school, and then if you get into a lab and you're on someone's research grant, there's no additional level of quality control per se. So that's, I mean, I don't see it quite as negatively as you do, Vincent.
I think it's a good idea, but historically, it's been impossible to get training grants. We've had one for 30 years with 4 students a year. So if they really make a change, that's fine. But I just think there's too much inertia. I think it's a great idea. And prohibit funding students on research grants? Sure, that's fine. I just don't believe they can do it.
But the advantage of doing this from the top down is that it would apply to everybody at once. So it's not as if your competitors across town are going to have bunches of graduate students either.
Yep. They also suggest paying postdocs more and limiting the number of years they can be supported, which is
before
cool.
you have to give them a permanent position.
Yeah.
That has the effect, among other things, of
limiting
that's birth control on postdocs. Yes.
Yeah.
I think the best suggestion is to use staff scientists.
I think that's a great suggestion.
Which is what John Udell has been pushing for years, right? Mm-hmm. And I would have loved to have a staff scientist all these years, running things and doing experiments. Some steady person who's there and reliable and is going to be there for more than a year.
Right.
I think this would be great.
Right, and that also ties into, I think we maybe skipped over this, they mentioned broadening the career paths.
Yes. Well, I think that's really important, but they don't really say how to do that.
No, because they don't, these are people who all followed the traditional research career, so they're not, part of that is also one of the many endemic problems here is that the people who need to change the system all came up through the system.
Yeah.
And it's hard to look outside of it and say, well, if you're not going to go on the tenure track or to research in industry, what are you going to do?
Yeah. They list a number of areas that they think students should, be able to have expertise in, writing, commerce, law, blah, blah, blah. They leave out communication, which is really important. It's interesting. I interviewed a potential student. I think she was an MD, PhD applicant a couple of weeks ago. And she said, I want to rotate in your lab to learn how to communicate because you do that well. And so that's cool, right? That's something different and it would be useful. And I think that sort of thing should be promoted. But in the current atmosphere, right, most people wouldn't dare do other things other than their research. So staff scientists, I think, is great. Then they talk a lot about grants, writing grants, focusing on the quality of science rather than the number of papers.
Right.
And Rich and Kathy, so many times you hear at study section, they published 10 papers last year. It just drives me nuts. Instead of saying the quality and what was learned, right?
Right.
I wish that could change.
And the ideas in the grant, the really genuinely novel ideas, creative thinking.
They say encourage risk-taking, which I think is so important, right? And so many times people say, this is not going to work. Well, try it. It might work.
Yeah.
Limiting the number of dollars, making better peer review panels. I think.
And what would make them better?
Well, one of the things they want to do is remove some of the constraints on the administrators who formulate the panels, who have to have an appropriate geographic, gender, diversity distribution, and that constrains them as to who they can get. So loosen that up some. That's one thing.
They say all current grant holders should be expected to serve at least once and maybe more. And you and I, Rich, did it. Have you done twice, Kathy?
Yes.
We've all done it. That's why we're on TWiV.
This second time around, I volunteered. I got my last grant, and I said, okay, it's time for me to give something back, and I volunteered to do it. That's the way it ought to be. Among other things, I wanted to make sure that there was somebody like me on the panel helping make the decisions. Okay, that's a little arrogant, I suppose, but I think I have some things I want to see, some ideas I want to see communicated.
Yeah.
Represented.
They also say we should revise guidelines so that young scientists have a break, and they can be thoughtful and risky, and I think that's great. And this is another thing that I think is very cool. Senior scientists with a wide appreciation for different fields can play important roles by counteracting the tendency of specialists to overvalue work in their own field. And what jumped into my head was herpes viruses. Man, do they fight for their field?
Yeah.
Holy moly. Anyway,
Yeah.
when review bodies become too insular, they risk becoming special interest groups. I think that's really right on. You can tell these people have been on study sections. There was a point here where they also said we should be a little bit more like the Howard Hughes in evaluating research programs. I'm not finding it now.
That also came under the heading of finding other ways to fund these enterprises, independent funding sources.
Right.
And they cited Hughes as an example of that.
All right, so then they talk about revising the indirect cost recovery for institutes and universities. And for those of you who don't know, for every dollar you get in your lab for grant-supported work, the university gets a fraction, which is negotiated with the NIH, and it can be 60, 70, 80, it can be over 100%, which goes to supporting the institution. It can be used to pay for the lights and the water and cleaning, but it's also it's used to pay for mortgages on buildings, right?
Right.
Which is crazy.
And it's supposed to be used for the stuff that you're not allowed to pay for off of your grant.
Right.
Pens and papers and supplies to run your computer and lab data pads for your notebook and yeah.
So, Kathy, a couple of weeks ago, we all were notified if you want your floors cleaned, you're going to have to pay for it yourself.
No way.
Is it ridiculous?
No way.
I'm
What
glad
are
to hear
indirect
nothing
costs
changed
for?
in Columbia.
Hey, Alan is laughing. Sorry, what did you say, Kathy?
I said, what are indirect costs for? Or what is the basic university budget for?
Administrators' salaries.
Don't go to a medical school. Are you at a medical school, Kathy?
Yeah.
But you're at a state medical school. Maybe that's better.
I don't know. We have to pay rent.
So we pay rent. That's how.
We pay the department or the medical school pays taxes to Central Campus. So for every research dollar that's spent, we have to spend some amount of money or give some amount of money to Central Campus. The concept of taxes was new to me when I came to a medical school.
Yeah, we pay tax for our wet space and our dry space. Then we have a dean's tax, which is on top of that. Then we have full-time employee taxes. And in the end, I bring in all this indirect money. It's not enough. I need to get another R1 to pay off my tax to be here.
Yeah.
Infuriating. So they proposed to have renegotiations with new universities to control these. Good luck. Hundreds of universities and institutes across the country, each one negotiated independently. I think it's a great idea, but man, that is quite a task.
Well, maybe they just do some blanket
They should.
thing and just say, you get 20% overhead. That's it.
It probably has to be ramped down over time, though.
Yeah.
They say gradually over the next decade for most of these things, and I think some of it, if it's going to happen, and I'm not at all convinced that it is, but if it's going to happen, some of this is just going to have to be handed down from on high, because the universities especially are going to lobby so hard and negotiate so loudly that if it's case by case, you're never going to get through all of that. Some of it is just going to have to be the federal agencies that do the funding saying, here's how it is, deal with it.
I do not see that happening. It has to come from the current NIH leadership.
Yes.
I do not see that happening. That's just my view of how NIH has been led in the last years since the previous leader. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't think he's willing to take that stand. Now, one thing I do disagree with, they say there should be a provision allowing 100% of faculty salaries to be supported on research grants. I think that's wrong. So currently you can't have 100% because the assumption is if you're at a university, you're doing something for them, and they should pay you at least 5%.
I take this. Wait. maybe I misunderstood what you were saying, but I take this to mean that they think that they should disallow the provision that allows 100% of faculty salaries to be supported.
Policy change should include
full reimbursement.
Full reimbursement.
Okay, the provision that allows. Okay, fine.
Changing that provision.
That's good. Because I think this is really a big problem. If universities would all at least contribute to, say, at half of faculty salaries, that would free up a lot of money. Right. I know it can't happen overnight, but I think that's a big part of the illness. Now, why can't...
Well, and that's birth control on PIs as well, because a lot of people are hired on soft money because they bring in the indirect costs. And
sure.
If the university has to pay for some support of each of the faculty, they aren't going to be willing or able to do that.
Yeah.
And that has a tendency to ramp the whole thing down at the PI level. That's going to impact on graduate student, postdoc, and all the rest of it.
Now, as you know, non-medical schools pay 9 months' salary typically, right, for tenured track professors. Mm-hmm. They commit to that when they hire someone because they have tuition, of course, to back it up and so forth. Medical schools, the medical student tuition goes elsewhere. It doesn't come to basic research scientists. So as Rich said, we're on soft money. We have to raise it. And I think that has to change. Otherwise, medical schools are not going to have basic science faculty. They're going to have very small ones. And I think that would be a loss because you can have a lot of good things coming out of that. Mm-hmm. Look at Michigan.
Yep. Look at Columbia. Look at Florida. You know.
So that's basically their suggestion. And they say, one more thing. They say we have to have a lot of public discussion of this. And I would like to write them and say, here on TWiV, we do discuss it, and we have tens of thousands of listeners, so you guys should get with the social media.
Well, and in fact, I was very encouraged to see, this is the first time I've actually seen comments on PubMed since they implemented it. And there are 4 comments from PubMed Commons, this new commenting system where anybody who's got a paper published in PubMed can sign up and comment. And they're actually pretty insightful. Mm-hmm. People have some good comments and things to say about this article.
Yeah. But there is already a discussion going on, folks, and many people are, and not just scientists, but we've involved the public, our listeners. Right. So it's good. So I think this is great that they publish this, generate more discussion, but really we know it's clear what has to be done for a while now. And Casadevall and Fang already made some of these suggestions a while ago. When are we going to do it?
Yeah.
But then kind of the kicker of this whole article comes at the last sentence of the acknowledgments. The views expressed here are personal opinions of the 4 authors and do not necessarily represent the positions of the academic or governmental organizations for which we work.
Of course. As my opinions are mine only and not Columbia University.
Yeah, so in other words, we're making all these policy recommendations, but no guarantees any of this is going to happen.
So anyway, it's tough. I know it's very tough for new people coming into this field. Something has to change.
So are you going to read Johnny Dell's thoughts?
So I sent an email.
I thought this response was great.
So, the funny thing is I sent John Udell an email last night. I said, what do you think about this? He sent me an email, and I said, can I read that on TWiV? He says, no, I have to make it politically correct. And that this is the version which is very different from the one he sent me. Nevertheless, he wrote, my son, the graduate student, emailed me the essay as soon as it appeared, and I read it open-mouthed with great interest and mounting enthusiasm. Please. I immediately sent it to my lab and to colleagues who are working to reform the system from within NIH. My views as a private citizen, not an NIH employee. The essay is superb. It identifies key problems and suggests appropriate solutions. I view it as the first glimmer of hope for real reform. Even though the authors are each at the very top of the scientific Mount Olympus, the key is for the NIH director to aggressively lead the reform movement. Without this, little, if anything, will happen.
Hear, hear.
In general, it is difficult to manage shrinkage. Usually systems are rebuilt after a crisis and crash. Can we reform science rationally and in a reasonable time frame? Can we deal with the inevitable tornadic blowback from the powers that be? Universities will freak out about increasing their coverage of PI salaries. Many institutions, particularly medical schools, have basically become nonprofit research parks for individual entrepreneurs, i.e. PIs who pay rent in the form of overheads and IP-generated revenues. Is that PI? IP-generated revenues, licensing royalties. Deans will rightly have nightmares about half-empty buildings with unpayable mortgages.
Yep.
Famous and powerful scientists will resist shrinking their labs, claiming that their work is so important, etc. Individual PIs will have a hard time reimagining how a lab can function without armies of graduate students and postdocs. Few PIs will want to give scarce research dollars to increase postdoc salaries or pay for staff scientists. Certainly everyone considers themselves above average. Lake Woebegone phenomenon. Someone has to explain that to me when I'm done. And will only leave PI-dom kicking and screaming as we downsize to reduce competition for NIH dollars to reasonable levels. Not to criticize the essay in the least, most of the problems and proposed solutions in the essay were previously identified and published by 3 previous reports from the National Academy of Sciences, which authors know since they wrote several of them. The only actions taken, other than the bump in postdoc salaries in 2003, have steadily made the situation worse. TWiV has an essential role in this process as a forum for sure, but perhaps more importantly as a model for all disciplines. We definitely need TWimmunology for increasing public involvement and airing the systematic problems stymieing the scientific process. Johnny. So he calls himself Johnny because I'm called Vinny, and he said to me a couple of weeks ago, you can call me Johnny, by the way.
So Lake Woebegone, if you're not familiar with it, is a reference to the radio show Prairie Home Companion, which occurs in the fictitious Lake Woebegone, where everybody is above average.
Where all the men are all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.
Yeah.
What's
Garrison Keillor's line?
What's the point of that? It's just an ideal place.
Because how
can
the children
everybody
are
be above average?
Yeah, right.
And how can all the men be good looking?
True. Rich, you're not being dragged kicking and screaming from your lab, right?
No.
And I won't be. And
you'd have to do that bit by attrition.
And Mike, I was just thinking about that. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if my line is not filled. Not that there's any such thing as a line anymore. Okay, but
Well, here when people leave, they say let's hire new people. We just hired 4, and they want to hire 2 more. Why? To get the indirects.
Sure.
Yeah. They need to once if the incentive system gets straightened out, there'll be less incentive to keep overhiring, and then as people retire, you won't necessarily replace all of them, and you can shrink the system that way. That is going to happen gradually if it happens.
One thing I keep thinking about is, what about other branches of science? Chemistry, physics. This problem is not the same. Is that right?
They didn't get into
people
the situation in the first place in many cases. Go ahead, Vincent.
I ask people that same question. They say they're all screwed already.
Yeah, they to some extent, if you look at something like physics, it has been funded in very specific, huge projects that if you're not part of one of those huge projects, you're broke. There are a lot of physicists, PhDs, who are not working in physics research. Yeah. But the funding system there are a lot fewer PIs.
Right.
And something like chemistry, in many cases, chemistry, they do have an employment problem. But my understanding is that some of it is similar to what's going on in biomedicine. Some of it is also from what's going on in industry, because chemistry has been more industry focused for a long time. So the problems are slightly different in different branches of science, but it depends on what the funding situation has been historically. I think in biomedical research, the central issue is that there was this period of incredible growth.
Right, from Vannevar Bush, post-World War II until
post World War
the
II,
80s.
Exactly. You get the you get this whole boom in research funding, and it goes up and up and up and up and up, and whole new institutes get formed, and NIH gets massive, and the budgets keep growing, and it led to the expectations that this would continue indefinitely.
Yeah, but I never expected it to continue forever, but I expect it to be sustained because it is a proven benefit for society, right? I mean,
yes, but what do you mean by sustained?
I think that's a good question. How much do you actually need to fund biomedical science to keep innovation and health reform and health solutions high? I just don't know the answer to that. But certainly a negative 20% growth is not it, right?
Right, but
why are we in a negative 20%?
That is part of the problem. And I saw somebody posted a statistic recently that the F-35 fighter jet program alone, if you took the money from that, would fund the NIH completely and NSF for something like 30 years.
Oh my gosh!
So it's not that the money doesn't exist, or even that the money doesn't exist within our own government. It's a question of where it's put.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, but even if you kept the budget steady and adjusted only for inflation, we would still have a serious problem because we produce way too many scientists.
I agree, and I think we do need reform. But I think not funding enough is ridiculous.
That has made the problem worse.
Considering the value of research to us compared to making new fighters every 10 years. It's crazy. It's totally a perverted priority in my view. I mean, we know that our health is better because of science and technology. Our life is better. So don't people understand this? What can we do to get reform started, though? It's not up to us, right? A lot of it's going to have to come from the top down. And that's why it's encouraging to see these particular authors saying this, but at the same time discouraging to see that they're not necessarily the ones who have the power to make these changes unilaterally. Can I run for NIH director?
Sure. Vincent.
You can try.
Go
I think
for
it's not an election, though.
Yeah,
No.
I know. It's a political appointee, right? And I'd have to stop podcasting, so forget it.
Probably. Yeah.
All
You'd
right,
have to wear a tie.
Can I wear a polio tie? Probably not, right?
Sure.
I don't know.
Do they exist?
Oh yeah, actually, I have a polio and a rhino tie, but I don't wear ties, so I never wear them.
Alan, did this or any of you, did this article make any press?
I don't think so.
No, I was sent to it. I was sent it by someone in our department. And maybe they sent it to the whole biomedical faculty. I can't remember who all it went to, but yeah.
I saw it pop up in the stream of press releases, and I said, "Oh, okay, systemic flaws. Yep, good." I didn't even really pay attention to the authors, and then when Rich sent it, I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, this has some weight."
Is this open access?
Yeah,
Yes.
it is. So that's good.
Good.
All right, let's read a couple of emails. Alan, you want to take that first one?
Sure. Kim writes, "Hello, TWivers. I have looked for information for years about my influenza question without finding anything. The vaccine only seems to last a few years and is only partially effective, less so as you age. But having the infection likely confers lifetime immunity. Could some of us be better off getting influenza until we reach age 65 and then getting the vaccine from there on in? I will continue to get vaccinated while my relatives are being treated for cancer when any risk reduction is better than none. Parents of young children and those in close contact with anyone who has a chronic disease also warrant vaccination. But I'm 50-ish now, in good health, and work at home. I know the higher vaccination rate, the less influenza for everyone, or so we assume, though I'm not aware of any studies that show this. If you do not wish to answer my question online, a very short paragraph opinion, okay, well, would be lovely. Well, we're doing it online. And then, since the following was a large study, maybe you could mention it. I just read it, and it's a link to comparative community burden and severity of seasonal pandemic influenza results of the Flu Watch cohort from the Lancet. And then she explains their results show 77% of influenza infections were asymptomatic, 83% who were symptomatic did not see their doctor, and 18% of unvaccinated people were infected yearly. It appears that our surveillance methods may need to change. Though I'm a layperson, I've learned much from your podcast. I grew up reading the Merck manual while in grade school, so anything medical is of interest. Some things do go over my head, but your podcast is at that challenging but fun learning level. Thank you for podcasting. Kim, who is in Grand Prairie, Alberta, currently at minus 10 Celsius, 14 Fahrenheit, but warming up to T-shirt weather tomorrow at minus 6. Up north in Canada, eh?
I recommend Tamiflu. Hey,
so there's an inaccurate statement in here that having infection likely confers lifelong immunity.
Yeah.
It may confer durable immunity to that particular strain, but the strains drift.
Right.
Okay? So you can't count on natural infection to keep you immune.
Also, there's a risk of dying from natural infection. There is a measurable risk, so you would like to avoid that. That's why we have a vaccine.
And I would say that even though it is true that the vaccine is not 100% effective, I would say that your own statement that any risk reduction is better than none applies throughout your life, not just in special circumstances.
Yep. This study is interesting. So many asymptomatic infections. Of course, this depends on the strain. Some strains are more virulent than others. And the particular one they are looking at was H1N1, I think, 2000. Well, it was probably a mix of strains. So depending on the season, you have more of one or the other, H1N1 versus H3N2, and they can be milder or more severe. So that really can control that. I find it interesting that Kim is from Grand Prairie, Alberta, where I have been to. It's about 8 hours north of Edmonton because my wife's family is from there. It is a tiny, tiny farming community. In fact, my wife's uncle was a farmer. So I just wonder, Kim, it's amazing.
That's really getting out there.
Yeah, it's really remote, and I'm surprised there's anybody listening to TWiV up there.
Well, it's great.
It's very cool. So
we're big in Buda.
I spent a week up there once, and there are lots of oil, those oil derrick things that go up and down. They're all over on the farms and so forth. So thanks, Kim. Kathy, can you take Conrad's email?
Sure. Conrad writes, "Hi, Vincent and company. I'm an 18-year-old Briton fascinated with biology. I'm going to study it at Imperial College, in fact, and I came across this paper recently." He gives a link, and he came across it when he was reading about modified genetic codes. "I think it shows the great variety that viral evolution can achieve and begs the question, what can't viruses evolve to infect? I hope you'll find it interesting and shed some light on the topic in an episode of TWiV. By the way, I came here from Coursera. I remember serendipitously choosing your course last year, and since then have loved all of it, parts 1 and 2. What you do with your course, your work, and podcast is truly remarkable, and I extend my sincere gratitude to you, Ashley, and everybody involved. You've seriously encouraged me to learn and perhaps even to become a virologist, although these are exciting times for biology, and I can't make any promises as to what else I'll discover. I've only been listening to TWiV for a couple of months, but I can safely say it's an interest I'll continue to pursue. For the good of science, please keep doing what you're doing. Love, Conrad from England." So I did link to this paper, the virus coevolution under a modified nuclear genetic code, and it's looking at virus infecting a kind of yeast, Staphylococcus segoviensis, with a genetic code where CUG, instead of coding for leucine, codes for serine. And so they have some evidence that RNA viruses co-evolved with yeasts that underwent a major evolutionary transition from the standard genetic code.
Yeah, it's cool.
So as I understood this, the viruses that are growing on these yeasts I want to make sure I'm right about this, have avoided that codon.
Yeah, that's right.
All but one of the CUG codons in the viral genome have been eliminated,
Right.
suggesting that the avoidance of the modified codon was important to viral adaptation. I think that's
pretty
so
cool.
It's
very cool. You know Jeremy Brune, don't you?
Yes,
Rick?
indeed. Jeremy
Buffalo.
Bruin's in the biology department at State University of New York at Buffalo.
Yep.
So I was in biochemistry in the medical school. He's on the liberal arts campus, but we interacted some. Yeah, we did one of his papers some time ago where he found blanking. This was RNA viral evidence for an RNA viral genome in the nucleus, an ancient one. I'm blanking on the virus, but it was an RNA virus. At any rate.
Yeah, it's a cool paper. And to answer, viruses can evolve to infect everything. They have, right? No matter what you put up, they get around it.
Viruses have even evolved to infect viruses.
Well, apparently, virus infected cells, right?
Yes.
Right. Well, that would be a living virus then, right? By extension.
Living?
If the infected cell is certainly living.
Is living.
Yes, I have no problem with, All right, so the next one is from Bill, who writes, Vincent, the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, has taken up the cudgel on all our behalfs. And this is, we mentioned this a while ago, that someone was trying to claim they had a patent on podcasting, I think, and was going after major podcasters, basically. And so this EFF asked for donations to deal with this, and they filed a challenge on October 11th last year, filed a challenge to the so-called podcasting patent used by a patent troll to shake down podcasters. They didn't shake us down.
Not as if we had any money.
Yes.
I was making a joke, yes.
Okay.
They could have a cut of the revenues from the show.
That's right.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
They would end up owing us money.
Yes.
So this is nice. People donated $76,000 to fund the campaign. And I think there is prior art. That's some of the research they did showed there's prior art and that these guys don't have a patent. So this should be good. So we're grateful for that. Thank you, Bill.
Yes.
I'm going to do the next one since that was short. Bruno writes, I was wondering why not talk a little bit about HIV CCR5 and the hot topic Ebola. This is just a suggestion. We did talk about CCR5, right?
Yeah,
pretty
we have
recently.
one occasionally, yep.
The last one was the zinc finger modification of lymphocytes.
Yes, right.
Ebola we haven't. Maybe we'll do it. Maybe we'll touch on this outbreak.
There's an outbreak going on, right?
Yeah, and apparently it's a new strain, so maybe we'll do it next week.
Yep.
Should we do one more round?
Sure.
We're back to Alan.
Okay, Don writes, Dear Professor Racaniello, first let me thank you and your colleagues for the informative and entertaining TWiV series. You certainly richly deserve all the kudos your fans have bestowed. Over the years, you've covered or discussed most of the transmissible agents, from phages, viri, through prions, bacteria, fungi, and multicellular parasites. You even touched on the Tasmanian devil facial cancer. Now comes the canine transmissible cancer, cites a paper in Science. Also, without a transmitting agent, except the intact whole cell. Is allografting in the wild for real, or is there something in the junk DNA that permits this unusual propagation? Not knowing which TWiV to send this to, I have loosely followed Sarah Palin's remedy for tough questions to send them to Allah. Respectfully, Don Kingsley. Or Don, sorry.
Wait, I don't know.
It's a bad pun.
Is it?
Yeah.
What did
send
she
them
say?
to Allah.
Is that what she actually said?
Yeah. Send them to all. Get it?
No.
Never mind.
I don't get it. What does she say? Does she say send them to Allah or?
I don't know what Sarah Palin says, but
Okay, I don't get it either way.
Anyway, I think the
you send it to
here,
all the TWiVs. You send it to.
Okay.
Well,
That's
I think maybe you,
TWiVs.
Vincent, you being the
I am not
head
Allah
honcho of the TWiVs, maybe that was the intent.
Oh, I didn't take it that way.
No,
Okay.
My wife tells me I'm not Allah at all.
No,
These are cool. He's right. It is an allograft because apparently both the Tasmanian facial cancer and the dog cancer. They're in highly inbred populations, so they don't reject the cancer cells. So for the Tasmanian devils, they transmit it by biting each other's faces. And I think they have limited MHC molecule expression on the surface, so the tumor cells don't get rejected and they take over the recipient. And in dogs, I think it's transmitted by sex. So these are cancer cells that highly mutated, and they simply grow in the recipient. Now, that wouldn't happen to you and me because we're genetically so diverse, but this is a cool story. It has nothing to do with viruses or anything in the DNA. Just it's a tumor cell that if you take a nude mouse and you inject HeLa cells, they develop tumors because they have no rejection mechanism. It's pretty cool.
Very interesting.
Yeah, neat.
All right. Kathy, you're next.
Jeff writes, "Hi, Vincent. In the last podcast, you noted that as outreach, your podcast reaches only people who are seeking to learn about the topic. You mentioned wanting to reach the people who aren't seeking to learn about science, i.e. the vast majority of people. I would recommend that one way scientist educators could reach some of these people is by teaching introductory biology courses for non-majors instead of concentrating on higher level courses. I'm lucky in this respect because I teach at a community college where most of our courses have extremely minimal prerequisites. If you have a pulse and can hold a pen, you can take my class. And that is the way I like it. The prerequisites are a little more than that, but not much. My courses are full of students who have a latent interest in aspects of biology, but who often don't think they're, quote, interested in science. They are there to fulfill a requirement on the way to their degree. They're on their way to a business or social work or econ degree, or even no degree at all, and as a job as an air conditioner repair person. When compared with science majors, I would bet these people go to more cocktail parties and church socials, and I suspect that is where the vast majority of people get their attitudes about science. I tell my students that I feel the most important thing I can do is help them arm themselves with critical thinking and facts so they can change the world over beers or grape juice. If all that happens is that one of my students confidently tells someone else that they feel that spending tax dollars on fruit fly research is important, or that vaccinating children does not harm them, then that is a huge victory. We can reach more cocktail parties by teaching courses with less prerequisites. I also have a blog that I sporadically attend to, mostly as a way of thinking to myself, but I realize that it might be a way of reaching more people too. Thank you for your wonderful work. I forgot to add that I'm trying to get a plaque assay for chlorella viruses a la James Van Etten going so that my students can measure viral titers of local lakes and ponds.
That's great.
Jeff. Cool. And I went to his blog. It seems to have a number of good entries. One that I found that's about good ways to make slides for presentation. And he has a link to a cool YouTube of a cone snail taking out a fish. It's really worth checking out his blog. So I was impressed with that.
I think this is another example of how everybody has to do something a little bit. He's got a great idea. He's teaching at a community college. Great. Mm-hmm. I think that I would love to teach a virology course at a beginning level, right? Like I just can't do it. But I think virology is in particular really appealing fundamentally. And if you make a really basic course, you could really engage people. Mm-hmm. But
I would encourage Jeff to actually contact Jim Van Etten directly.
Yeah, sure.
Jim's a great guy, and he would love to help out with putting together a plaque assay for chlorella. So go for it.
Absolutely. Jim's a great guy. Rich, you are next, and look at who you got.
Look at this. My buddy Neva from Buda. Neva writes, "Hi, Twivers. Uh-oh. I hope the anti-vaccine folks are not emboldened by this. We have too much misunderstanding and lunacy and damage to children already from not vaccinating." And she links to a BBC news article, and I will quote from, I don't know if this is quote from it or elsewhere, but it summarizes it. "In a stunning reversal, world-renowned pediatric gastroenterologist Professor John Walker Smith won his appeal against the United Kingdom's General Medical Council Regulatory Board that had ruled against both him and Andrew Wakefield for their roles in the 1998 Lancet MMR paper, which raised questions about a link to autism. The complete victory means that Walker Smith has been returned to the status of a fully licensed physician in the UK, although he had already retired in 2006, 6 years before the GMC trial even began. So, yeah, I could see how people could... so this is one of the people associated with the Wakefield study who had been lost his license because of his association with the study, and in the reevaluation of that, they decided that basically the evidence wasn't compelling enough for the action that had been taken, and they restored his license. I think his involvement in the study was a little more peripheral than they originally cited him for, or something like that. Reading the actual report, it didn't look like the reversal was all that big a deal, but I could easily see how this could get twisted.
Sure.
By people who say, "Oh, look, the study was okay after all." Right? They've reversed themselves. So.
Right. No, I gather this is a very specific legal case. This fellow participated with the study, but he was not the one rigging the data, doing the whole deal, and apparently in the judgment, the justice handing it down even states there is now no respectable body of opinion which supports Dr. Wakefield's hypothesis, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So it doesn't change any of that. It's just this guy probably wasn't guilty of a serious enough charge associated with it too.
Right.
All right. So we'll be ready when we get the letter saying, "Hey, look at this."
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Neva.
Keep us
Neva. Posted.
Last one's from Marin, who writes, "Hi, TWivers. First, I wanted to thank you for choosing my suggestion for Pick of the Week in TWiV 254. Here you see, I'm not shy and writing you again." I think we said, don't be shy. I know TWiV 267 was already some while ago, but I still want to comment on it. You discussed the paper about TMPRRS2 cleaving HA in mice and had some questions in the discussion afterwards. Luckily, some of your questions were already answered. You're wondering if TMPRRS2 is also the protease cleaving HA in humans. So far, no human study was made, but the proteases, TMPRRS2 and HAT, were actually identified in human bronchial airway tissue by profiling the expressed proteases and by testing them for being able to cleave HA in cell culture. The same group is also already working on inhibitors. Professor Garten and Eva Botcher-Freibertschauser from the University of Marburg, Germany, were actually the ones identifying the proteases. So if you want to have the whole picture, how the proteases were found and how far treatment development is, feel free to contact Professor Garten from the University of Marburg. I met Professor Garten last week at the 24th annual meeting of the German Society of Virology and told him about your questions. He told me that he or Eva would be happy to join your show for an episode to answer all your questions, and she sends the contact data. Thanks for the great podcast. Greets from sunny Berlin, 4 p.m., 18 degrees Celsius. Thank you, Marin. That's a good... I knew our questions would be answered.
Yes.
Great.
By our audience.
The pick of the week that she had was the Hello Maestro videos, which were the ones in French that were good.
Those
science.
are great. Those are really great.
Yeah.
I think she started her email by saying, "I've been shy until now, and it's my first writing." So we said, "Don't be shy." Thank you, Marin. All right, let's do some picks of our own today. Alan, what do you have for us?
Well, I had a different one, but you pointed out that I had picked that particular blog before. There was a posting on it that was especially good, and I had forgotten that I had already picked.
I'm sorry. How'd you know it was me?
The blog.
But it was the Amboceptor blog, and it was a good posting about airplanes as vectors.
Right, so. Which is something that Dixon is frequently mentioning, and the post actually mentions TWiV. Mm-hmm. And it talks about how people have known about that problem for many, many years. Anyway, I have a different airplane-related pick, and this is not a science pick at all. This is just a something that happened to me this morning. I've recently been pursuing a lifelong dream of learning to fly.
Cool.
And this morning, I guess I scared the flight instructor so badly that he got out of the plane and told me to fly myself. So
you're soloed. Good for you.
Cool. Congratulations.
So that happened, and my pick of the week is the airport that was insane enough to allow me to do that. It's Northampton Airport in Northampton, Massachusetts. If you're anywhere in Western Massachusetts and you want to learn how to fly, these folks are great.
I did that in college. I soloed and then I stopped taking lessons.
Oh,
Yeah, this has been a dream of mine as well, which maybe I will pursue. So how was it, Alan?
it was great. It was. I actually took my first flight lesson 30 years ago with my stepfather, and then life intervened in various things, and we never got back to it. And so now I'm.
How many hours do you have before you soloed?
I had a total of 15, which is kind of a lot.
It's a lot. I did it after 8. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of it was we had some days with weather that wasn't very good for practicing landing, so we did other stuff. We practiced other things that you're not supposed to normally get to until after you've soloed. Like I've had some simulated instrument experience and various other stuff. So
I did mine in Ithaca, New York.
Ah.
But it was very different back in 1972 or 3, whatever.
Hey, the plane I'm learning on was built not much after that. So
I did a Cessna 130.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm flying a Piper Warrior, but it's from the late 70s.
I had a female flight instructor, and she said, okay, I'm getting out, but I want you to turn the prop off because I'm getting married tonight and I don't want to mess my hair up. I'll never forget that for some reason.
That's great.
Yeah.
She was a pilot herself.
If you go to this airport site, don't go hungry because there's a picture of food that
I know.
flashes early. And
Just getting hungry from that.
It's just restaurants that you can fly to easily from there.
Well, I'll tell you, the Northampton Airport. My daughter went to Smith College, and Northampton is a great place to eat.
Yes,
for sure. All right,
Kathy, what do you have?
I scrolled away. Oh, turn your iPhone into a microscope. And it's a cool video that shows you how, with not very much time and not very much money and expenses, you can make your iPhone into a microscope that can magnify 175 times. And so they show a time-lapse series of some plant cells desiccating, I think it was. 175x magnification, some plexiglass. You get a lens from a cheap laser pointer, and it's pretty detailed how to do it, but the whole video is only 4 minutes long, but they show you how many bolts and washers and which drill bits and things you need, and that gives some pretty cool images. And so you're not limited to just doing microscopy in the house. You can take it out to the field, and there's an image of some pepper. And because we had, I think it was a listener pick a couple weeks ago about the
paper.
Yeah, it was like a TEDx type talk of a
50-cent microscope.
50-cent microscope. So this is
I think there's so much you can see that's cool even at that magnification. Everybody should do that.
Yeah,
it's very neat.
This is neat.
I thought this was great. I watched the video, Kathy. I really liked it. It was cool.
Yeah.
Rich, what do you have?
I have just something I ran across. I don't know how, and I just lost it. It's a site with my favorite science gifs. It's just a series of these little animations of various science things. Mercury reacting with aluminum, hydrogen peroxide catalyzed by potassium iodide. That's an amazing reaction.
Yes.
So these are just fun to look through.
They need to put plaque assays in here.
Oh, yeah, they don't have that.
Yeah.
The hydrogen peroxide mixed with potassium iodide seems to be a very popular trick.
Yeah, you can do it with colored stuff. And this first guy's doing it, and he's not wearing safety glasses. But most of them are. Don't try this at home, especially without safety glasses.
I like mixing potassium iodide and hydrogen peroxide. Two different colors make these huge expanding things out of graduated cylinders. Very cool.
Yeah.
I got to do that.
Yeah. The magnetic putty swallowing the metal cube whole.
Yes, that's good.
So, I watched these while I was listening to the press conference about the Tamiflu thing. So I was
These guys-
multitasking.
Yeah, you
These
need
guys
this.
doing the hydrogen peroxide thing in their in their living room. And
Yes,
they've got
yes.
plastic all over the place, but I don't think it's good enough. It goes
Yeah.
up to the
It's
ceiling.
cool.
Yeah.
All right.
My pick is a movie called Particle Fever. This is about the building of the Hadron Collider, and it is a science documentary, basically, but it's so well done. They basically followed a number of scientists involved in this for like a year, and have them planning it and worrying about whether it's going to work and showing them building it, and finally it working, and the guy crying when it's spitting out the first data. It is so bloody well done. I mean, you got to watch this. I am so jealous.
All right.
I want to make this movie
This
for virology.
Can I get this on Netflix?
I don't know. It's in theaters at the moment, which is pretty cool. And I think they're going to have all the typical digital downloads soon. But there are other ways, of course, to get it.
I checked our theater and said, "Are you getting this?" And she wrote back and said, "We already had it."
Ah,
And I missed it. I said, "Oh, it wasn't on my radar screen, and I hadn't heard the word of mouth then." But
yeah, so it'll be out soon on
It's
digital.
it's not available
Netflix?
yet on Netflix, but I just put it on my save
Yeah,
list.
this is just so cool. It's just really well done.
the trailer is very captivating.
I mean, they just
Yeah.
did it. This is professionally made, of course, and they just put it together so well. And I think that the thing that's cool is that someone had the interest and money to put together this very compelling, rendition. I mean, this is an important thing, and it's a huge investment, as we mentioned earlier in physics, but it's just really well done. So check it out. I love it. We have a listener pick from Nathan.
Oh, hey, and it's
Sorry.
their box office statistics are here too. It has grossed over $500,000,
Good.
Wow.
which in Hollywood terms is a pretty small change, but great.
Yeah.
So after I saw this, Rich and Alan, I wrote to Chris Condian at ASM and I said, why didn't we put our movie in theaters? Why isn't it on IMDb? Why didn't NPR write a review? And you know what they said? ASM didn't want to take a position on the needle, so they didn't want to publicize it. Can you believe it? After we spent all that time.
Wow.
It's a shame because I think, we're not BSL-4 is not a Hadron Collider, but in biology, that's about as big as you get, right? A $200 million facility. Anyway, I'm sorry I get emotional about these things. Listener pick Nathan writes, Dear learned men and women of TWiV, thank you again for your superb podcast, particularly for the flamboyant, flowering, overdone discussion of fonts in TWiV 278. The interview with Eugene Koonin in 275 was extraordinary. We now know when viruses or selfish elements originated on Earth and that they've been with us since life began more than 3 billion years ago. I recently completed listening to all the back episodes of TWiV. If the average university course has 45 hours of lecture time, I now have completed more than 6 graduate-level virology classes. Thank you all for your generous gift to the world.
He's also had some meteorology classes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Listening to all the back episode of TWiV is quite a task at this point.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's getting harder every week. I have a listener pick on YouTube. I recommend the entire 13-part Jacob Bronowski's BBC series, The Ascent of Man. Though more than 40 years old, his analysis and insights into the tensions between scientists, non-scientists, and democratic politics are highly relevant to today's so-called scientific debates of vaccination, global warming, agricultural, biotechnology, etc. Gives a link for Part 1. 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 13C in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. P.S. In the world of biotechnology patent law, the havoc created by the Supreme Court's myriad decision continues. See my letter and your discussion on TWiV 233. I think we had said we'd get Nathan on to talk about that because I believe he is a lawyer, so we should do that. I always forget all these things I want to do.
Well, there is quite a queue of them.
But, I mean, it would be great to have a biotech lawyer, right? Come on and talk about it. Yeah, we do have, there's no shortage of cool things to do. All right, that'll do it for 282. We are marching towards number 300. Very exciting. We're at iTunes and TWiV.tv. And please send us your questions and comments to TWiV at TWiV.tv. Kathy Spindler is at the University of Michigan. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks. This was fun.
Always fun, isn't it? Rich Condit is at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you. This is always a good time. It's great to be together again.
And Alan Dove is at turbidplaque.com. You can also find him on Twitter. Thank you, Alan.
Always a pleasure.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.